Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
I like your I voted early sticker.
You like that?
That's nice.
Go team.
I got to get me one of those.
You get you.
I will. I'm hoping, speaking of early, I'm hoping this podcast is a little on the short side so I can go vote after this.
All right. Then we've got a goal.
We're dating ourselves because I know this podcast will probably come out in a couple of days. So the world we're living in, the world you guys are living in might be a little bit different.
Yes.
So we'll find out.
Yes, we will.
We'll find out together. So what are we discussing today?
What are we discussing today? Well, I have a thought for us.
Hooray.
Right. So I actually have a quotation to share and a scripture lesson to share.
Nice.
So I'm doing a little bit of a writing project. And part of the writing project was to consider a reflection based on a text from the book of the prophet Jeremiah. So Jeremiah lived at a very, very difficult time. It was right as his nation was about to be overwhelmed, the little nation of Israel. And at that time, he and so many people were exiled. So he was still living, in his home and in his homeland, but right on the cusp of understanding that all that was going to be taken away. So devastating time.
Got it.
But I have a story because he offers an image which seems spectacular given that time.
Okay.
So I want to share that. But to start off, here's a quote from Edward Abbey, who wrote a lot about the American West and about the wilderness. And the book, the quotation's from a book called Desert Solitaire. And he says in this book, and this is his blessing to the reader. May your trails be crooked, winding, lonesome, dangerous, leading to the most amazing view. Not your normal words of blessing, I would say.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
May your mountains rise into and above the clouds. May your rivers flow without end, meandering through pastoral valleys, tinkling with bells, where something strange and more beautiful and more full of wonder than your deepest dreams waits for you, beyond that next turning of the canyon walls.
Wow.
Isn't that remarkable?
That is so remarkable. It creates so many mental images.
Right.
It's not just a straightforward image. It's like an experience.
Yeah. Because I think we can imagine mountains disappearing in the mist. They're so high, they're above the clouds. This idea of the trail that winds through a canyon wall.
Right.
We can sort of picture that even if we haven't been in those environments. Right. We've probably seen enough National Geographics over the years, right? To conjure those images. So I love it because he's not holding anything back. And I think he's saying that some of the best adventures in life are the ones that we think we might not be able to do, that are potentially breathtaking and maybe a little scary.
Yeah.
Maybe real scary.
I like the image of it's not necessarily a straightforward journey, that there's twists and turns and you might not know what's coming up next.
Yeah.
But just you wait around that next turn could be everything.
Could be, right? And it's a very promising image too, because he says something strange and more beautiful and more full of wonder than your deepest dreams waits for you. It's like there's something out there, a presence out there that wants the best for us. Now, Edward Abbey was not an explicitly religious person by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that, from our standpoint, we could say this is it's an image of grace, that God wants to surprise us in a good way. And that part of being faithful might mean being open to good surprises like that.
Sure.
Create the space for those surprises to happen.
Right.
Which requires a certain kind of vulnerability and openness on our part, right? Because we can kind of get a little closed in and clenched.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That reminds me of my favorite quote about luck, which is that luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. It's great.
It's my favorite. I have been accused multiple times of being very lucky which is true, which is not untrue. But I also like to think I maybe had some help, and also had some hand in it myself.
Right. I am sure you have.
Which is to say, but the idea of this being open, of like preparing yourself, preparing all that preparation of being open so that when you do come around the next bend, your eyes are up and your eyes are open and you're ready to see and ready to
Right.
take it all in.
You're not going to miss it.
Yeah.
So let's move to Jeremiah for a second.
Oh, goody.
A little different from Edward Abbey, but in some ways, Edward Abbey was kind of a tough writer. I mean, he was not about painting images of the desert as this beautiful space that just, go out into the desert and find yourself. He would say, if you go out in the desert to find yourself and you're not prepared, the desert will hurt you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah is living at a time that could be described as a kind of wilderness time. And so these are the words that are, so by the way, we think that Jeremiah was surrounded by people who actually wrote his words down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and preserved them, which I
That's
think is
handy.
great. Yeah. And so the book actually that bears his name is considered a mishmash of all kinds of things that he was thinking. And it's not even apparently in chronological order, so you can't read it and think there's a nice clear progression from there he was then to there, on and on. It doesn't work that way. So here's a little piece that comes from the book of Jeremiah. It's chapter 17, verses 5 through 10. And it starts off in a pretty tough way. Thus says the Lord, cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength, whose hearts turn away from the Lord. That's a tough start.
Cheerful.
Like curses.
Yeah.
Started with a curse again,
Good.
right?
Helpful.
It's kind of Jeremiah's.
Is that his MO?
He's not a real, not a happy person. I mean, he didn't live at a happy time, right?
Sure.
But he tends to be tough on his audience. That's the other thing about him.
Okay.
He says, they shall be like a shrub in the desert and shall not see when relief comes. They shall live in the parched places of the wilderness in an uninhabited salt land. So he's saying if your trust is narrowed down only to what you, in a sense, can see and know and measure, right? Only in people, then you're cutting yourselves off from a larger world that's more expansive, that's a little like Abby's world waiting for you around the corner, right? And there's something out there that's gracious, it's invisible, you don't know exactly what it is, but it's waiting for you in a good way. Then the whole thing flips. He says, blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. And then he has this amazing image. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought, it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. Now, when a person who's got a salty personality says something that sweet, you want to pay attention.
Yeah.
Right?
Hydration.
Hydrate. Right? For sure.
Yeah.
Love it. So here's somebody who's, he's really starts off in this really, tough kind of way.
Yeah.
But he has this wonderful image. In the year of drought, it is not anxious. Reminded me back, in the very beginning of the pandemic, we said to people, look, if we can try to be less anxious, more knowledgeable, and compassionate, that'll be a pretty good foundation.
I remember you saying that in staff meeting.
I did say that.
I think, I needed to hear it about 17 more times. So I was sitting in my little, my tiny office at my previous house. Just the ceiling was 6 feet high in that room. And just being like, okay, if you say so.
Right. Less anxious. Yeah, I didn't want to say non-anxious because that seemed to set the bar too high.
I appreciated how you worded it. Yeah.
Just drop it down a couple of degrees.
Yeah, we're in this together.
Right. So
interesting team building exercise, I'll tell you that.
It sure was and is. And so part of what I like about this, so the thing I discovered about this, which I thought was really exciting, It shall not fear when heat Oh, here it is. They shall be like a tree planted by water. And I found out that the word that's used in this story for planted actually means transplanted.
Oh,
A little difference.
that is very different.
So it's as if this entity, this plant, whatever this thing is, it has been moved from a place where it wasn't getting hydrated to a place where it had an endless supply of water bottles.
That's so nice. Yeah.
Recyclable, of course.
Obviously.
And so here's the sense that it's made that movement. It's positioned itself next to something that gives water. And I was just thinking that this would be a really good way to sort of look at our lives from time to time to say, have we actually planted ourselves by something that's giving life to us so that then we have the life to be able to share for others, right? Because I think that if you talk with people who are caregivers and in certain vocations and always being stretched to their limit, it sounds like they're dried out.
Yeah.
Like the juice is not there.
Right.
And so a large part of what people have to figure out in those situations is you got to get nourishment somehow. You've got to figure it out, right, to find a way. And sometimes that can be very hard, if not almost impossible to do. But this story, I think, is claiming that this is a vision of God who wants to make sure that we have the nourishment that we need and encourages us to take whatever steps we can to make sure we are getting the hydration we need. And I think then the promise is there are a lot of things about us, about our circumstances that we cannot control. And here the reference is to drought. This is a part of the world that often, was in the midst of famine or drought during Jeremiah's lifetime. And so in a sense, he was saying we can't control that, but we can try to control, where the resources might be able to come to us so we can survive that in some way. So then we wind up, even in that time of drought, it said this person is not anxious.
Right.
I think that's a pretty remarkable possibility.
Yeah.
Because, we're living in times that sort of foster a certain anxiety. And the idea that we don't have to be part of that. We don't have to choose that. We don't have to let that define our reality. And that certainly gets picked up by Jesus when he's really saying, over and over again, do not fear. Right? One of the most commonly repeated phrases in the Bible. So anyway, I thought this was a really interesting word.
Yeah.
This is something that was spoken probably 2,600 years ago. We think Jeremiah lived around 600 years before Jesus. And here it is, a word that's come to us all the way across the centuries. And here we are.
That's incredible. So what do you think are some, if we're trying to place ourselves by the stream and move away from the desert, what are some things we people can do to move towards the stream?
So the one thing that I hear about all the time now is the dangers that come with isolation. And of course, the shrub that's described in this story is isolated. It's described as something that's alone, and it can't get connected in a way. So part of the nourishment, part of the way that a lot of people in the world find some nurture for themselves when they can't really get good resources is by connecting with other people, staying close to other people. And I think that now we're starting to see church actually as that essential community of faith that helps us to stay by the river, right? It brings that life into us. It keeps stretching us. It challenges us, but it also invites us into that way of life that can be good and healthy for us. I think that's a big way.
That's a huge way.
Yeah, beyond isolation.
Yeah, don't remember what I was watching, but it was saying something about how we have less of each other.
Yeah.
That this idea of of community, of tribe, feels so lost. And obviously, I think it was probably in the process of, with everybody in their houses and gates and fences and all those things. I think obviously the pandemic didn't help one iota. like, how do you find your way back when we all adjusted to it?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
I don't know. That's hard.
I think that's right. And we can have all the resources in the world, but if we're disconnected with other people, it soon takes its toll. There's an old story that, I don't know if this ever happened, but it's a story that gets passed on. I learned it when I was living in Scotland a long, long time ago. In rural communities, people in northern Scotland especially spend a lot of time sitting by the fire.
Sure.
Right. It's damp. You can see your breath in the house. You know, you're keeping your coat on 24/7.
Yeah.
And the story is that there was this one person in the community who had become very isolated. He lost someone, close to him. And he just was kind of shrinking in on himself. And the pastor visited one day, and they were sitting by the fire. And this man was saying, I just don't feel like going out anymore. I don't feel like being with people anymore. And the pastor reached over and took one of the tongs, from the fireplace and took one of the coals from the fire and moved it away from the fire. And of course, it just went, no fire, went to black. And the man was looking at it and he said, yeah, I see your point.
That's a great image.
Isn't that a wonderful image?
That's wonderful.
And, made a decision to kind of turn himself back into community.
Wow.
And I guess there are lots of ways, I think, to answer your question, but one of them is connection itself, personal connection. But there's this word that pops up in this story a lot, which is trust. And to me, it goes back to Abby's comment, where you're waiting for, there's something waiting for you around the turn, something, as he says, more beautiful, more wonderful. And that's a wonderful thought to keep in mind, right? But that takes trust, because it's easy to get ourselves into a frame of mind where we're thinking, oh, what's going to happen next? Or, oh boy, that happened. Now look at this. And the rest of it's going to go to seed, I guess, as well. And instead of that, to say, so what is it that God really is waiting to give us, graciously wanting us to have? It's more the image of God as this great host, wanting to provide a good surprise.
Right.
And so that trust is part of what orients us so that we can live in a non-anxious way.
So in college, I took an early Christian history class, and the teacher described that the image of God that was described during different parts of history was very much a reflection of what those people were living through. When things were dark, it was God was a bit vengeful. When things were more peaceful, it was a peaceful, loving God. It seemed to people were drawn to those different aspects of the divine.
Yep.
And so I find it really interesting from what you were saying of the setting of Jeremiah, that for him to be like, there's a mountaintop view up there, guys.
Yeah.
It's just around maybe a few more bends. Feels a little countercultural in a time when things seemed particularly rough.
Right. Great point. And the other thing about Jeremiah is that he can be so hard to read, right? Because he's very tough on people, and he's a bit of a blamer. But he does have this surprising image. And he also did one of the most outrageous things that connected with any of the prophets. When the land was going to be overtaken by the invading Babylonian army, he bought a piece of land.
Oh, did he?
And, I think people were saying, the real estate market is really bad right now.
It's buying low.
I mean, you do you, but
oh my gosh.
Yeah, he bought a piece of land. And the great thing about it is the whole deal, like the whole transaction in all its detail, is laid out. So we actually now know what a real estate transaction looked like 2,600 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's
That's
amazing.
super cool.
And you sign this and you take the scroll and you put it over here and that person signs it and they give it to somebody else and they seal it. And oh my gosh, it's a whole thing. And so, right? And so here's the thing though. There was a German pastor in the Second World War who was involved in the resistance. And he kept a journal while he was doing his work. And what became his most inspiring passage, it was that whole section about buying a piece of land.
Oh, really?
During exile.
Oh,
because he said, here's a situation where it looks like there's no future. Everything is imploding. It's going to be disaster for whatever. And instead, he said, look at Jeremiah. He actually bought a piece of land at this time.
Right.
And truth be told, years and years and years down the road, actually those people of Israel, not the same ones, but their descendants, actually came back to Israel and rebuilt the nation. So that was a very, talk about trusting thing to do.
Right. Hopeful.
Very hopeful. And I'm just curious to see how we can, those outrageous acts of hope are wonderful.
Investing in the future when you don't know what it's going to look like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No sure thing.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
trust, invest,
And
and hydrate. Right?
I like it. There's a Peloton instructor who every time there's she builds in water breaks. She goes, hydration station. That's all I can think of right now. Move your tree to hydration station,
There you go.
friends.
Transplant yourself whenever necessary.
I love it. This is fantastic. Thank you so much, Ed. I'm literally crying laughing from that. And thank you all so much for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.